the webinar will start. So welcome to everybody in the room and also online. We have a large online audience, I think, today. So to our seminar on sleep, insomnia and well-being, historical perspectives. We have two speakers today. First speaking will be Dr. Megan Leitch, who's currently a reader in English literature at Cardiff University, but will shortly be moving to the Netherlands to a chair of medieval literature and culture at the University of Groningen. She's published various monographs, including on treason literature, The War of the Roses, but also, more to our purpose, sleep in Middle English literature. And she's currently on a Leverhulme Fellowship working on a new book project entitled The Medieval Middlebrow, Romance and the Body Politic, 1300 to 1534. And she's also editing a book on medieval sleep. We also have with us Dr. Brigitte Steger, who's Associate Professor in Japanese Studies at the University of Cambridge. She has written an award-winning book on sleep in Japanese culture and published various volumes on other areas, but edited two books on sleep, both in Asia and the West, and also more generally worlds of sleep. She works both on contemporary sleep and also in the earlier period, the Heian period in Japan. She's also the editor of a forthcoming 6-volume series with Bloomsbury, The Cultural History of Sleep and Dreaming. And this is one in which Megan is editing one of the volumes. So I'd like to invite Megan to the first talk.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Just give me a minute while I locate my PowerPoint. We need to, hang on, do it through screen sharing, do it?
Yes.
Looks promising. We'll go with that. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you all very much for coming, both those of you in the room and those of you present online. As my title suggests, I'm going to talk about the interrelations of sleep, well-being, and the emotions in literature written in England during the later Middle Ages. And I started exploring the nexus of these things in a book I published a couple of years ago, which considers how Middle English literature registers intimate concerns with sleep and the spaces in which it takes place. So concerns, that is, with what sleep or insomnia says about sleepers' emotions and about how ethical their behavior may or may not be. And since then, I've also become the PI of a small but quite interdisciplinary study funded by the Welsh Crucible called The Medieval Future of Sleep, slightly polemically, which brings medieval studies and religious studies together with modern medicine and psychology to test sleeping strategies from past and present with an aim to consider how sleep quality and quantity, as well as overall well-being, might be improved. And we're looking particularly at Wales in a post-COVID climate. So this paper is about what the literary evidence can tell us about medieval English perceptions of the links between sleep and well-being. But I'm also interested in what we might perhaps gain for ourselves by learning about the sleep strategies and rhythms of the past. We've inherited a progress narrative, if you will, one that tends to emphasize how much better modern society is than the medieval past, where medieval is often a byword for all things bad, backwards, or unruly. And it might at first glance seem easy to fit the medieval science of sleep into this popular perception, since we can, of course, discredit its basis in the medieval theory of the four humours, which I'll talk about, and we can laud the superiority of modern understandings of science and medicine. But at a time when the World Health Organization has been warning that modern industrialized societies have been living through a sleep loss epidemic, which has only, for many at least, been worsened by the diurnal disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic, we might also ask ourselves if there are things we've forgotten along the way. If we might have something to learn from pre-modern views of the benefits of sleep, from the sleep habits of societies that did not have access to 24/7 electric light, screens and smartphones, and so forth. So over the past few years, when I've told people that I'm working on sleep in medieval literature, they often say, oh, so you mean dream visions? Dream visions being the medieval literary genre that most obviously features sleep. And yes, to an extent, I do mean dream visions, but not only that perhaps more posh form of literary sleep. I'm also interested in the broader ways in which sleep matters in late medieval English literature and culture, how sleep is bound up with ethical and emotional commentaries in a wider range of genres, from romances to fabliaux, from dietaries to drama. And then also in how this broader analysis of sleep, how reading across these genres can contribute to our understanding of dream visions, which are certainly well studied, but the sleep in the dream visions has not received as much critical attention. I'm also interested in how early modern English writers sometimes use sleep to signify in the same ways as their medieval forebears, and what this might suggest about continuities across the Mediterranean divide. So my book establishes that there is a cultural grammar or habitus about how to perform and interpret sleep that's shared across medieval Europe, but it also argues that medieval English literature concentrates on sleep particularly strongly and distinctively in the ways that Middle English literature dwells on sleep's implications for ethical states, emotional scripts, and visionary experience. And I'm going to focus today in particular on some of the ways in which sleep in Middle English romances, cycloplays, and dream visions contributes to well-being by facilitating the processing of emotions, especially traumatic emotions. In a similar fashion to the way in which swooning often signifies a strong emotion in medieval literature, whether sorrow or joy, the sudden onset of sleep recognizably follows manifestations of powerful sorrow and anger. But sleep not only marks these quote-unquote unhealthful emotions, as they're called in medieval sources, it also helps to mediate these unhealthful emotions. So I'm going to look at how, as a form of sorrow-making and anger management in medieval English literature, sleep contributes to the performance of culturally determined emotive scripts. How, in other words, sleep bodies forth perceived truths about individuals, but in a way that suggests paths to better well-being. So, in the medieval English cultural imagination, sleep is an embodied and culturally determined act. It is both performed and interpreted by characters and contemporaries, both subject to a particular habitus and understood through particular and pervasive hermeneutic lenses. Sleep here is something that overpowers, but also something that can be prepared for. But in neither case is sleep something that can be affected by an act of will. Representations of sleepers in Middle English literature engage with varied but overlapping contemporary ideas of the dangers of sleep, from the supernatural noonday demon, sometimes thought to prey upon unwary sleepers, to condemnations of idleness as sin, and to the instructions and conduct manuals and medical tracts that readers should not sleep during the day for the damage that it could do to their social reputations, as well as to their bodily health. And given that an appetite for sleep in Middle English literature often leads to sex, snoring, sloth, and other forms of intemperance, sleep is an experience to which the language of desire and surrender, as well as of regulation and censure, inheres in this culture. And yet representations of sleep are also shaped by the locus amoinis tradition, and that's the idea of a pleasant outdoor space that's conducive to peaceful slumber. And Western medieval literary sleep also has medical dimensions that I'll talk more about, since sleep was widely understood as beneficial for health and well-being, both physical and mental. It was seen as a natural and necessary process which required preparation and proper practice, and that could ward off or alleviate disease or emotional distemper. And sleep's epistemological dimensions are foregrounded in the way in which sleep enabled contemplation and enlightenment by leading to dreams and other revelations of truth and knowledge. And yet sleep could, on the other hand, also constitute a lack of perception. And in this complicated but coherent cultural grammar of sleep, place or space matters too. The spaces in which literary characters are overpowered by sleep, whether outside under an apple tree or in a bedchamber or in the bottom of a boat, or in a church, problematically, or in the middle of a public hall. All of these spaces carry different connotations, expectations, possibilities, and perils. So literary sleep, then, has sometimes been seen as merely a pause in the plot, a mundane necessity, or a platform for other significant experiences. Because sleep, of course, can be a euphemism for intimate encounters, or it can be the prelude to visionary experience, to a dream. And in these terms, literary sleep might seem simply a concomitant of action, an accompanying absence, a moment of inactivity rather than an act, a form of punctuation that is essential but unremarkable. But one of the most remarkable things about sleep in Middle English textual culture, I think, is the extent to which it is remarked upon. They talk about it a lot in a wide variety of genres and in ways that bespeak attentiveness to both the performance and the interpretation of sleep. So to show you why I'm talking about things like performance and interpretation in relation to sleep, I'll start with what medieval conduct manuals have to say about sleep. Courtesy books state that just as self-control was fundamental to courteous speech, table manners, and receiving or being a guest, so self-regulation was required with regard to sleep, particularly after mealtimes. As Andrew Ward explains, on the slide, all men, and this applied to women too, but Ward specifies men, of what age or complexion soever they be of, should take their natural rest and sleep in the night, and to eschew meridial or daytime sleep. But if need shall compel a man to sleep after his meat, let him make a pause, and then let him stand and lean and sleep against a cupboard, or else let him sit upright in a chair and sleep. So apparently, since I'm sure you're all sitting upright in your chairs, it would be at least sort of all right if you had a bit of a nap. It's my obligatory sleep joke. And the measures and postures prescribed here for unnatural but irresistible daytime or postprandial sleep involve exerting and, importantly, visibly displaying at least a measure of temperance. And even when sleeping is fully sanctioned at night, correct procedures must be observed. We are told that to sleep groveling upon the stomach and the belly is not good. To sleep on the back upright is utterly to be abhorred. When you do sleep, let not your neck, neither your shoulders, nor your hands, nor feet, nor no other part of your body lie bare uncovered. Sleep not with an empty stomach, nor sleep not after you've eaten meat 1 hour or 2 after. In your bed, lie with your head somewhat high, lest the meat which is in your stomach ascend to the roof of the stomach. So sleep then required a great deal of thought and care. Courtly persons, the sorts of persons who would be reading these texts, had to be conscientious about how they performed their loss of consciousness. And this was partly because of sleep's role in digestion, as we see here with this mention of the stomach. And while I've cited a 16th century courtesy books here, because it sums things up rather nicely, this one, this parallels the injunctions that are found in 14th and 15th century conduct manuals and dietaries, which also make it clear that improper sleep or sloth was considered bad not only for health, but also for social reputation and for spiritual well-being. So that's the ethical view of sleep in later medieval England, and we will find it reflected, for instance, in various English romances, where characters have daytime sleeps with catastrophic consequences, or in the morality play Mankind, for another example, where the title character's slothful sleep is something that signals the devil's triumph. But while one therefore had to be very careful about sleep, sleep was still very much a good thing, and could be especially useful for regulating the emotions. John Trevisa's late 14th century De Proprietatibus Rerum on the properties of things devotes 2 chapters to how profitable sleep is, including, again, sleep's role in digestion. In the humoral theory of the body, in which health and well-being were determined by an individual's fluctuating economy of liquids with emotional attributes, sleep had a powerful role to play in generating balance by transforming food into the 4 humors, or liquids. Galenic medicine, which spread through the medieval West in the 12th century and remained the dominant scientific paradigm until the end of the 16th, understood an imbalance in the humors to signify a strong emotion. So black bile indicating melancholy or sorrow, yellow bile indicating choler or anger. And medieval dietaries, such as Gilbert Keimer's, emphasize how sleep, by supporting digestion and thus facilitating the transformation of food into the four humors, could restore the balance between the humors or the emotions that was necessary for well-being. So that's Gilbert Keimer there on the slide, seeking the more amicable natural humors, that is phlegm and blood, rather than black and yellow bile. Or as Chaucer puts it in the Squire's Tale, sleep is the nurse of digestion. So it's almost a way of pressing the reset button, if you will, when strong and overpowering and unhelpful emotion takes over. Sleep, as Marlowe's Dr. Foster's would put it, it's confounding these passions with a quiet sleep. And passions being the pre-modern English word for the emotions. So while sleep was important for physical health, sleep was also significant for mental health, offering relief from the unhealthful humors of melancholy and choler. While medieval mentalities did not distinguish between mental health and physical health in the same terms that we do today, in pre-Cartesian conceptions of the interrelations of mind and body, holistic views of health meant that the implications of a bodily act such as sleep for emotional well-being were well recognized. And although this scientific paradigm was shared across medieval Europe, the literature of medieval England engages with it in distinctive ways. There's an especially clear statement of this way in which uncomfortable emotion engenders sleep in a 13th century Anglo-Norman version of the Life of the Seven Sleepers. I've just given you the translation there. It's down here for want of space. I know it's a tad crowded, but I thought it'd be better to have multiple examples per slide so you have a bit longer to look at them rather than clicking from one to the next more rapidly. So Charder here states that whether out of distress or out of worry, the 7 young men went to sleep. For it often happens, you know, that when people are very sad on account of the weight of their worries, it is natural that they are prompt to slumber. So this commentary, medieval England, is not paralleled in Charder's Latin source, produced in a different culture, but it is also found in Charder's other saint's life, Joseph's. And when literary characters get so angry or so sad that they fall asleep, unconsciousness serves as a form of making emotion recognizable, of externalizing the imagined authenticity of affect. And in many Middle English texts, and often in contrast with their sources where applicable, unhealthful emotions such as sorrow, anxiety, and anger, or the humoral imbalances that they indicate, precipitate sleep and are relieved by sleep. For instance, while books are often seen as the cause of the narrator's sleep in Chaucer's dream visions, books are not the only cause that Chaucer suggests. In the Parliament of Fowls, that's the one up there under UR screen sharing, in the Parliament of Fowls, the narrator falls asleep not only after reading, but also when he is fulfilled of thought and busy heaviness. Heaviness in Middle English can mean simply drowsiness or weight, as it would today. But this here, as in other insular examples, suggests the word's more affective implications of sorrow, anxiety, or annoyance. And I suggest that applies to the Book of the Duchess here too, where Chaucer's narrator falls asleep on his book, but in a way that figures his reading material as more of a pillow rather than as a causal factor. He falls asleep on his book rather than necessarily because of it. Though critics often write about the book as though that is the cause. There's a vow to Morpheus as well, the god of sleep in this text, but most clearly, Chaucer says that the sleep results from a lust to sleep after a period of melancholy. And melancholy, as that strong, unhealthful emotion, could cause both the narrator's initial insomnia and his later strong appetite for sleep because of different stages in the effects of black bile on the brain. So while sleeplessness was thought to occur if the brain dried, following clogging of its pathways by black bile, excessive sleepiness resulted from a direct effect of the fluid black bile on the brain. So it's all about fluids and vapors and that sort of thing moving around the body and the brain. Very much showing the interrelations between body and brain in that sense. And we also find this sort of causal relationship between the emotions in sleep in medieval drama. For instance, again, in the York cycle, the English York cycle in pageant 13, Joseph's trouble about Mary. Joseph is distraught that Mary is having a child that can't be his, and that she will only say that it is his and God's. She, like her maid, says that there's no one else, no other man whose child this could have been. And Joseph, in his distress, goes for a walk. He says that he will remain until he has slept his fill, because his heart is so heavy. So again, that heaviness there, as we saw in Chaucer, he needs to sleep due to the weight of his emotions, his cares. And that produces his sleep and a corrective vision from an angel. And as we'll also see now in examples drawn from Thomas Malory's 15th century Morte d'Arthur with Arthur and Lancelot, these examples read as demonstrations of Chartreuse' maxim that the weight of worries or emotions prompts people to slumber. So in romance, protagonist sleep is also generated by and read by characters and narrators as a sign of humoral imbalance in need of redress. Malory's Morte d'Arthur is quite a useful touchstone here, actually. In the tale of the Saint Grail, the Holy Grail, after attempting but failing to enter a chapel, Lancelot is passing heavy and dismayed. So heavy, dismayed, and falls asleep outdoors. And I think I haven't given you that particular example, but I've given you the next one. So just to say here that the narrator does mention that all this vision Sir Lancelot saw and beheld it, for he slept not verily. It's not truly asleep, but nonetheless, Lancelot's inability to entirely extricate himself from this sleep is narrated as a strong sign of his sin. So his sinful heaviness produces his sleep here. So while elsewhere sleep can facilitate visionary experience, here sleep impedes it. And other characters corroborate a diegetic reading of Lancelot's sleep, a sleep preceded by uncomfortable emotions and dismay as a sign of his negative ethical state. That is, as an indication that Lancelot dwelleth in some deadly sin, or that he is unhappy in the sense of unfortunate. In Malory's Tristram section, the tale of Sir Tristram, strong emotion again produces sleep. So here, Lancelot reads a copy of a letter in which King Mark of Cornwall slanders Lancelot and Guinevere, revealing their adulterous affair to Arthur. And we're told, and when he, Lancelot, wist or understood the intent and the meaning of the letter, he was so wroth, he was so angry, that he laid himself down on his bed to sleep. So here he gets really, really angry, and then he sort of goes poof and falls straight asleep, which is in some ways, I think, hard for us to imagine, but speaks to this different approach to the relationship between emotions and sleep and well-being. Powerful anger here, in humoral terms, yellow bile, or a choleric temperament, generates a sleep that makes Lancelot's unethical and affective state legible to both characters and readers. A strong emotion, that is, marks the need for pressing the humoral reset button that sleep entails. Sleep offers a form of redress, a way of restoring a more balanced mind. But Malory also specifies that this letter is read after morning mass. And given the great number of events, encounters, and jousts that occur in the Morte d'Arthur without any temporal tag at all, this seems a telling detail. We are told at what time of day this happens, after morning mass. And that notifies the reader that when Lancelot's anger prompts him to sleep in his bed, it does so in the middle of the day. And from a humoral perspective, the fact that it is in the morning that choler dominates, choler was thought to dominate, correlates with Lancelot's morning surrender to anger-induced sleep. But also, as we've seen in medieval conduct manuals and dietaries, daytime sleep was explicitly condemned. So there's a tension here between the frameworks in which late medieval English readers may have read the politics of this sleep. Midday sleep may still be seen as helpful for Lancelot here from a medical perspective, if not from a moral one, since his sleep resets his emotions, providing a form of anger management that is healthy for him. Presumably, since this is Lancelot, this is also healthy for others, since he does not resort to violence. And in the final example I'll give you to draw things together, in Piers the Ploughman, Will weeps for woe and wrath, and in a winking, worth till hay was a slaver. And that's the italicized line at the top left there. William Langland, of course, in this poem also treats sleep in ways that carry moral implications. David Johnson has observed that, given exegetical and homiletic perspectives on how context and type of sleep determine whether that sleep is slothful and sinful or virtuous, Will's sleep, the narrator's sleep here, can have positive moral qualities. And that's a view that's particularly persuasive in light of the language that's usually used when Will enters sleep. He has lots of different dream visions in this poem, rather than just one. And the word sleep in Piers Plowman is rarely part of the alliteration of the strongly alliterative lines of which it forms a part. Langland instead tends to place emphasis on external agency in the causation of the narrator's sleep. So for instance, he says things like, I babbled on my beads, they brought me asleep. So it's the beads that are bringing him to sleep. Or reason had ruth on me and rocked me asleep. Reason took pity on me and rocked me to sleep. So in those ways, Langland highlights the heuristic nature of sleep as a religiously guided vehicle traveling towards the next vision. But while Will is not often responsible for producing his own sleep, on one occasion, his contumacious rebuke of reason makes him, like the dreamer elsewhere in Pearl, responsible for being propelled out of visionary sleep. And that's here in Passus 11, where Will laments losing his sleep, he's sorrowful here because he values sleep as a state of spiritual enlightenment. But that makes it all the more remarkable, I think, that when Will falls asleep due to woe and wrath, due to these strong, unhealthful emotions, like the York plays Joseph or Malory's Lancelot, or the Pearl Dreamer, to a medieval English reader, this affect-induced sleep marks all the more strongly that Will is in need of a corrective. His sleep yields a dream. His sleep is itself a good thing, but the fact that he needs this sleep is not. So as I hope I've shown, falling asleep in Middle English literature has recognizable emotional connotations and ones that bridge genres that are not always read together. Sleeping off a strong emotion is a way in which Middle English literature scripts constructions of interiority that suggest how individual characters really feel, as well as how they might, in a different sense, feel better. And while we no longer believe that emotional dispositions are governed by the body's balance of four liquids, with food transformed into the four humors through digestive processes aided by sleep, we have come to believe in things like the gut-brain axis, signaling a perhaps not entirely dissimilar way of recognizing that we are indeed what we eat. So perhaps Chowdhury was onto something when he noted that people who are worried, angry, or sorrowful are prone to slumber. Perhaps Malory's Lancelot, when he gets so angry that he goes poof and falls asleep, can be seen to be following the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas' advice that those who are upset might feel better if they indulge in a bath, some wine, or a good sleep. Perhaps Lancelot, so often seen as a champion in battle, might also now be seen as a champion of self-care. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. Now we turn to Brigitte. We vote at the other side of the world of Japan.
Okay, thank you very much. So, shares. Before I start, I have actually something very old-fashioned to do. I have handouts because one of the quotes is too long, so it's just one page. The other one is also there, and I also have a few books on sleep which I published. You might want to have a look. Thank you, Megan. This was very interesting talk. I will also talk about emotions and sleep, but from a slightly different perspective. Also focusing on sleeplessness rather than on sleep as such, and also talking about Japan, but roughly the same period, perhaps a little bit earlier. At night, I lie in bed, but cannot sleep. Well, maybe. Yes. So when trying to understand kind of natural sleep patterns along the human lineage, as Charles Nunn has put it, people often look at hunter-gatherers or agricultural societies, but actually many of the pre-modern societies were very highly sophisticated, highly hierarchical, very diverse societies. And what we know is mainly the life of the aristocracy, nobility, later perhaps medieval time also commoners. But I will focus today on the nobility in Japan in the capital Heian. That's why it's called the Heian period. So if I use this term, it's roughly about the 9th and 10th, 11th century, 12th century. And but the Kamakura period is slightly different in terms of politics, but the life of the aristocracy has remained more or less the same. So I want to talk today about sleep, or actually more about sleeplessness of the nobility living in this in Heian, and from about the 10th to the 13th century. So this illustration is from the Yamaino Soshi scrolls of illnesses, and this is the only source I found that actually deals with insomnia. And it does so by just having this little paragraph to it. So there was a woman who lived there, and although she was not in any particular pain, she was unable to sleep at night. So it doesn't give any cause, except that it excludes one cause, pain, and it also doesn't give any cure. So there are other medical sources of this time, they don't talk about sleeplessness. So unfortunately, I cannot talk about these aspects today. Maybe they have been lost, but maybe they have also not been too interested in this issue. So in order to learn about involuntary sleeplessness, we have to refer to other primary sources. So genealogies, textbooks, diaries, novels. Soshi is kind of like a blog today, poems, and also picture scrolls. So this is a newer picture scroll, but this is one of the most famous authors depicted here. You might have all heard about the Tales of Genji. So Murasaki Shikibu writes in Japanese vernacular. And this was quite interesting because in the 7th century already, the whole administrative system was imported from China, and also the Chinese language and writing systems. But the men were generally writing in Chinese, so called Kanbun. So it's a kind of a Japanized version of Chinese. But they also developed this writing system called hiragana, it's kind of syllabic writing system with some Chinese immersed. And this was called the women's hand. So there were mainly women were writing this, especially women were writing the most interesting literature. And if you look for sources about sleep and sleep habits, the Chinese sources give you very brief information, like it was late, I went to sleep, kind of thing. So nothing about the circumstances, nothing about the reason for it. So if we want to know about sleeping habits and also what people were thinking about sleep, we have to refer to the women writers. And obviously they were all aristocracy. The writers themselves were kind of middle rank aristocracy, but they often lived at courts where they were kind of part of literary salons and so on, and improved the reputation of the family. That's why they were very important, and also it was very appreciated. So when I attempt to summarize, so here's some of the names. Actually, these are not their real names. These are names that were known because women didn't record their names at this time because that in spirit. So when we read this literature, we find quite a lot of information about nightlife. Actually, aristocratic life often happened in the night. This has to do partly with their jobs, because their job was also to do night duty. So they had to be up at night. But there were also lots of banquets, festivals, and they just got getting up at night to go to the beach. And so this is 14th century. 14th century source, go to the beach and watch the moon, or they look out of their window or out of the house and watch the moon, watch how beautiful the snow is, or they expect the lovers. So these are, of course, voluntary reasons for why you would stay up at night. It was quite common, and perhaps the emphasis in the literature is a little bit more than the average nighttime activity, because this is more interesting to write about than when you sleep, of course. So, and as I said, they also had night duties. So, but even within this small select group, and I want to explain a little bit the sleep furniture, sleep arrangement, there was quite a hierarchy. So this was also reflected in the sleep arrangement, in the bedding. So this is obviously for some of the highest ranking one. It's this architecture is called Shinnen. So Shin actually is sleep, and is focused or arranged around the sleeping space. You can see here, this one is kind of bed. It's called Kijo. It's a curtained area. And very interesting, perhaps, this curtain area Kijo was given as a kind of present to girls, not to boys, girls when they came of age, and that enabled them to marry and welcome a husband and create a family. Some of these buildings were actually much more sophisticated. They had more layers of what's called hisashi, so this around. And but it's interesting that this is not a dowry. It's really the girls had this to get the family. So it was centered around the women, and they would then marry and have a husband, and occasionally later life they would flounder around and have a second wife perhaps, and visit others as well, but the main wife they usually would visit. It was family life was a little bit more fluid than it's today, so it's mainly about having children. So this was only for the very highest class, so like maybe 10 families, this kind of bed. Maybe 15 families, the classes or the ranks, they changed throughout the centuries. So it's, so this was the kind of the bed, but rather throne than bed, because they are all of the emperor. And so he also stayed in a place like this during the day. So they had a night one and a day. And the bedroom was the only room that actually had kind of solid walls, more or less. Most other families, they just had either a smaller building out of their parents' house, so on a wing high, or they had just curtains. So these seem to be, from my interpretation, and I have to admit, when we discuss Japanese or Heian period sleep arrangement, there's no systematic description of them. So we have to, there's a little line here and there, there's a little description here, over there, and they don't describe it systematically. So we really have to infer from all these references. But this seems to be, first of all, lower ranking, so they all share a bed, and they are probably in one of this next room to the main bedroom, Nurigome, and you see they're all sharing, all the women sharing the place. They are therefore most likely unmarried or without a husband. You can also see from this that, well, maybe there's very simple, here you see it a little bit, very simple headrest, so they're actually hard, also kind of wooden, probably. It's not described very much at all. They all have their hair open, so I think the headrest is mainly to support their hair, that they don't move around. And they share, and they have their clothes, the kimono, as a kind of cover over to sleep. And you see also that there's always the light on in the night. Actually, in the case of the emperor, they put on the light in the bedroom just for the night, not during the day. And the houses were actually quite darkish. Anyway, so there was sharing of room was also important. What you see here is that there is no comfortable bedding. I mean, the highest ranks, they had maybe a mat, so tatami, like similar to tatami today, which were a bit higher, maybe 5 centimeters, 7 centimeters. Most had only very simple mats. The headrest was quite uncomfortable. They slept on wooden floor if they were lucky, or perhaps lower rates on earthen floor. So, but interestingly enough, you don't find any complaints about uncomfortable bedding. And there is also, so there's the one complaint I found about vermins or mosquitoes in this case, Gamma, is about how the wings, the soft wings, the tiny wings make, and this is annoying. It's not about being stung and not about being any other uncomfortable place. They sometimes talk about cold, but cold more in an emotional way, and also about making sure that the baby has that the mother warms up the floor for the baby so that the baby doesn't have cold. But otherwise, there is no story like the princess on the pea that sleeps over a pea and 20 mattresses, and therefore is identified as a princess because she's so sensitive that she even notices that. Nothing about this. And all the reasons that make someone able to sleep are emotion. And that's perhaps quite good. So you see here, also this is in a temple, older woman and here she even sleeps across the place. Interestingly, in Europe, you have aristocratic women often don't raise their own child. They have a wet nurse to do that. In Japan, the aristocracy too had wet nurses, or they're called milk mothers actually, but they don't replace the mother. So the ideal was always that the child would sleep with the mother, unless of course the mother was dead, because many women died of childbirth, and this was also noticed as a way of creating skinship. Skinship is a modern Japanese term, but the idea was quite similar, available also in Japan. So skin is made of skin, obviously, and kinship, and it's to provide a feeling of safety and security that people could sleep. So I have not found any quote with a baby or a child actually under the age of 12 sleeping on its own. So that's always, adults can sleep on their own, and that often causes their sleeplessness. And the mother-child bond was often expressed in a way of co-sleeping or wanting to co-sleep. This I have to just briefly also explain. So you see here also a pillow. So this is a woman, she in the night, man would visit a woman during the night only, as long as they were not married. So this was the courting period for 3 nights. They would visit and only then they would see each other and get married when they were older. So the younger ones were kind of through the parents. And you see in front of the bed, the attendants would be sleeping. So there is kind of also co-sleeping in that sense. And this is a quote from the Hamamatsu Junagon Monogatari. In this story, the Junagon, it's a mid-rank counselor, he goes to China to look for his father, who he recognizes as the son of the emperor there. But anyway, he has an illicit relationship with another consort of the emperor who is Japanese. And of course, that's illicit. So he brings the toddler back to Japan and introduces the toddler to the aunt, so to the sister of this empress. And immediately the son recognizes this woman as quasi as his mother, although it's his aunt. And this is expressed that he called her mother, and from that moment on would not leave her side, and at night would sleep next to no one else. So it's clear this motherly love or mother-child relationship is often expressed by the way that they want to sleep as well. And the author of this novel, he might have actually referred to her own diary, where she says that she slept with her 2 nieces whose mother had died left and right of her during the whole when she was young and for many years. So this was obviously something where people really felt emotional safety, and if they were security, if they were outside of this emotional relationship, they would often find it hard to sleep. For instance, if a woman would go to court, court of Sugawara no Takasuri, for instance, they wouldn't be able to sleep. But there is one, and now please look at your handout, and I will read the analysis for that. There's one scene in the case of Genji, which describes a very interesting scene of whole family co-sleep. And in this scene, it's Yukiri, who is the son of Prince Genji. He has a childhood sweetheart who he marries, so Kumoi no Kari, and they together have initially a monogamous relationship, 6, 7, or 8 children, and very, very nice, because they also grew up as together with their common grandmother. So a very nice relationship, very stable relationship. And but one night, Yukiri starts another romance. Although at this night, with the widow of his friend, so at this night, it's they don't have a relationship yet in terms of having sex together, but it's clearly starting. And so Kumoi no Kari, the wife, knows about this relationship that it started. I don't know how she did, so she closes her shutters that he cannot. That's more difficult for him to enter. And at the beginning, he wants to talk about this. So he feels in love, but also excluded from his family. So Kumoi no Kari pretends to sleep and doesn't want to engage with him. And he looks out, opens the shutters, looks out at the moon, and he's in a very romantic kind of mood. And is angry that his wife doesn't talk to him. But eventually, then he falls asleep and dreams about his friend on the flute he has been given. But then at a certain point, he's woken up because his little one of his sons has caught the cold and is sneezing. And this is quite interesting because first the milk mother, the kind of care, wet nurse takes care of the child. But then the mother, who no longer has milk in her breast, and this is described like this, if you read the original text, breastfeeds the child to comfort. And she talks also to her husband Yugiri, and so they reconcile them. So you see that this kind of co-sleeping, this taking care of the child is very important. She accuses him also of bringing in the evil spirits by going out. So that's another reason for being sick and therefore also sleepless. And it's very interesting that she does this skinship, let's say, through breastfeeding, even though she doesn't have milk anymore. So clearly, first of all, that she's used to breastfeeding, so it's not only the wet nurse, but also clearly that there's not only the aspect of feeding the child, but comforting the child was already quite clearly understood and known during the time. So, and at the beginning of the episode, Yugiri finds himself kind of distanced from the family and cannot sleep therefore, but then they talk and he finds her very attractive again, and because she's so smart and gives him interesting answers, that he falls in love again with his wife and is together in this family. So, but this example already shows, and now I come to the sleeplessness, that there are several reasons acknowledged for being sleepless. One is illness caused by evil spirits. There are also some Buddhist priests and so always in the available. And that's the most important rupture in one sense of social belonging and community. And that's something that it's also recognized today as one of the most important reasons why people cannot sleep. So in psychology, and very important longing and often unrequited love. So that makes people fall asleep. One other little example is in the Torikaya. This is a 14th century novel, and the Naishi no Kami is a high-ranking court official. She had long been lady in waiting for the imperial princess and has now concealed herself in the countryside. Well, the story is very complicated because she pretends to be a woman, and her sister pretends to be a man, and so they swap, and one of them gets pregnant, obviously, and so complicated story. But anyway, so she used to sleep with the princess, and now, because the princess is no longer here, she cannot sleep anymore. And then the swap, and the other, not the same role, but a different person, she comes back to the palace and sees the poor princess who's suffering and goes and sleeps next to her to comfort her. So that was a very important way to deal with. So as I said, there was no story like the Princess on the Peak. All sleeplessness was emotional. And if you remember, the Princess on the Peak, this test was done to identify her as a princess. And in the same way, the inability to sleep was shown as a way to show how your sophistication, your sensibilities, and also how much you are in love. And this is another story from the Izumi Shikibu diary, in which she talks about herself in the third person. And she says, she accuses one of her lovers, you sleep too well, you're not really in love with me. And he then says, oh my dear, you think that I sleep too well, but actually I don't sleep. And he quotes a poem which he only starts when one is in love, and the original poem called One Cannot Even Feign One's Sleep. So means this being in love is also, especially in the love poetry, and the love poetry was very important during courting time especially, but yeah, it was very, very central to Japanese literature, was often used the way, I cannot sleep, so I'm I'm very much in love, I'm very sophisticated, and you sleep too well, that means you're not loving me at all. So she describes how lying awake anxiously because she has not heard from him for a long time. At last one night, there's a knock at her gate, and her poem, she accuses him of sleeping soundly, untroubled by thoughts of love. So it's very interesting that she's not complaining about not being able to sleep because she finds it difficult not to sleep, but she's complaining to show how sophisticated she is. So in summary, if you have questions later, I can talk about many other aspects as well. So a central theme in our discussion of sleep arrangement has been how co-sleeping provided care, emotional stability and security in a sense of belonging to the family, or to also the imperial princess, the one you serve as well. So this was clearly recognized, and a description of co-sleeping was used almost synonymously for a close family relationship, especially that between mother and child, or mother surrogate and child. Sleeping alone as an adult was often associated with feelings of cold and loneliness. I haven't talked about this much, but often people expressed that it's so cold, and my sleeves was full of tears and that froze and so on. And along with a variety of other causes such as grief, illness, and lovesickness, often resulted in sleepless nights. So, however, references to sleep are not necessarily describing actual behavior, so we have to be careful on the way that literature contextualizes sleeplessness as an expression of love and sensitivity. My contention is that in Heian period literature, the language of sleeplessness is used to express the quality of relationships and the inner world of emotions. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much. Again, fascinating paper and linking very interestingly with parents. So would you like to come up to the front?